I was 64 years old when my son and daughter-in-law dragged me to court. They wanted everything: my house, my savings, even the jewelry my husband gave me before he passed. I thought, after 30 years of raising that boy on my own, sacrificing everything for him, he'd take care of me in my old age. But sitting there in that cold courtroom, listening to my daughter-in-law rattling off my assets like I was already 6 feet under, it hit me. To them, I was nothing but a burden. The judge asked the bailiff to read the full list of my assets. And when he started going through it, item by item, I watched my son's face drain of color, because there was something on that list they weren't expecting, something that was about to flip the script completely. My name's Margaret, I'm 64 years old, and the day my son filed a lawsuit to take everything I had, I finally understood what it feels like to have the rug pulled out from under you. It wasn't losing the money that hurt the most. It was realizing that, to him, to that boy I'd carried in my arms, raised all by myself after his father died, I was nothing more than an obstacle standing between him and an early inheritance. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up a bit, 'cause this story didn't start in that courtroom. It started way before that, with signs so small I pretended not to see them, because facing the truth would have hurt way too much. All this went down here in Augusta, Georgia, where I've lived for over 40 years now. I'd just turned 64, it was fall of 2022, and I'd been living alone in my 3-bedroom house in Somerville ever since my husband James passed in 2018. I was retired, worked 35 years as a nurse at University Hospital, and my routine was pretty simple. Church on Sundays at Mount Zion Baptist, prayer group on Wednesdays, cemetery visits every Friday to bring flowers to James. I thought I'd built a decent life, had my little house paid off, my savings tucked away, the jewelry James gave me over the years, nothing fancy, but it was mine. It was the fruit of a lifetime of honest work, and I figured when my time came, all of it would naturally pass to my son, with love, with gratitude. Boy, was I wrong. Hurts just thinking about it. Marcus had always been my world. Only child, born when I was 28 after 5 years of trying to get pregnant. James and I gave that boy everything. Paid for private school, college, helped with the down payment on his first car, everything. When James died, Marcus was 36, working as a manager at a bank downtown, married to Keisha for 6 years by then. They lived in a modern condo near the Riverwalk. No kids. Keisha, look, from their wedding day on, I felt something off about her. Nothing I could point to and say, that's it right there. It was more of a gut feeling. She was never warm with me, never wanted to sit in the kitchen over coffee and just talk like I used to do with my own mother-in-law back in the day. She was polite, smiled at all the right times, but always with this cold, calculated distance. And I saw the way she looked at things in my house, at my mother's crystal cabinet, at the paintings on the walls, at the diamond ring James gave me for our 20th anniversary. It wasn't admiration, it was appraisal. After James was gone, Marcus started coming around more. At first I was happy about it, thought he'd realized his mama was alone, needed some company. He'd come by on Saturdays, mow the lawn, change light bulbs, stuff like that. But slowly, almost without me noticing, the conversations started shifting. Mom, you managing okay with the expenses on this house? Mom, isn't it time to think about something smaller, more practical? Mom, have you considered selling? With this hot market, you could make good money and move into an apartment. I always gave him the same answer, that I was doing just fine, that James's pension plus my retirement covered everything, that I didn't want to leave this house full of memories. But he wouldn't let up. He'd circle back to it every single week, like water dripping on stone. And Keisha, when she'd tag along, would wander through the house touching things, picking up picture frames, opening drawers, like she already owned the place. Then came a Sunday that changed everything. They'd come over for lunch. I made that roasted chicken Marcus always loved, with mac and cheese and collard greens the way his grandma used to make it. After we ate, I went into the kitchen to wash dishes, and they stayed in the living room. I didn't mean to listen, didn't mean to eavesdrop. But Keisha's voice was loud, impatient. Huh, Marcus, your mother's sitting on a gold mine and acting like she's broke. This house is worth at least 300 grand. Those jewels, that diamond ring of hers, your father's watch, all of it just sitting there collecting dust while we're stuck paying condo rent. Marcus mumbled something low, but his tone wasn't disagreeing, it was calculating. My stomach turned. I dropped the dish towel in the sink and just stood there, hands dripping wet, heart pounding out of rhythm. They were talking about me like I was already dead, like my things were already theirs. That night, after they left, I sat in James's armchair and cried till I had no tears left. But the worst was still to come. In the weeks that followed, Marcus's visits got more frequent, but they also got way more tense. He stopped coming alone. Keisha was always there with him, and I could tell she was the one calling the shots. They started bringing papers, brochures for senior communities, pamphlets for compact apartments, even information about nursing homes they kept calling assisted living facilities. "Mum, you need to think about the future," Marcus would say, pushing the papers in my direction like I was some child who couldn't make her own decisions. "What if you fall and nobody's around? What if there's some kind of emergency?" I'd look at him and try to find that little boy I'd rocked to sleep, the teenager who cried in my lap when he didn't pass his driver's test the first time, the young man who hugged me tight on graduation day. But all I saw was a 40-year-old man with cold eyes, repeating arguments I was dead certain his wife had planted in his head. The last straw came on a Tuesday in November. I remember, 'cause it was the anniversary of my mother's death, and I'd spent the morning at the cemetery, leaving yellow chrysanthemums on her grave right next to James's. When I got back home, Marcus's car was parked in the driveway. He had a key I'd given him 1 year ago for emergencies, but when I opened the door, there he was with Keisha in my living room, along with some man in a suit I'd never laid eyes on before. "Mom, this is Mr. Richardson," Marcus said, without so much as a hi, without even asking if I was okay. "He's a realtor. We asked him to do an appraisal of the house." I froze right there in the hallway, still holding my purse, trying to process what I was hearing. "Appraisal. I didn't ask for any appraisal." Keisha got up from the couch with that smile that never reached her eyes. "Margaret, we're just trying to help. Marcus is worried about you. This house is becoming a burden, and the sooner you make a decision, the better." I felt the anger rising up my throat, hot and bitter. "Get out of my house." My voice came out steadier than I expected. "All three of you, now." The realtor grabbed his briefcase real quick and practically ran for the door. Marcus turned red, but he didn't budge. "Mom, you're being irrational." "Irrational?" I dropped my purse on the side table and walked right up to him. "So, what's irrational is barging into your mother's house, bringing a stranger here without permission, and treating her like she's incompetent. I raised you by myself after your father died, worked double shifts to pay for your college, and now you're gonna stand here and call me irrational. 'Cause I don't want to give up my house." Keisha crossed her arms, and I saw that look I'd seen before. Contempt. "Margaret, with all due respect, you're not seeing the big picture. This house is worth a lot of money you could use to have a comfortable retirement in a place that's appropriate for your age." "Appropriate for my age," I laughed. but there was no humor in it whatsoever. I'm 64, not 94. I still drive, still do my own grocery shopping, still take care of myself just fine. Marcus ran his hand over his face in that tired way, like I was some difficult problem he had to solve, and that's when it hit me. I'd become a problem to him, not a mother, a problem. "We're leaving," he said, grabbing Keisha by the arm. "But you need to think seriously about this, Mom. We're not going to keep offering help forever." Help. He called that help. I didn't answer, just stood there watching them walk out, listening to the car start up and drive away. When the house went silent again, I locked the door, leaned against it, and let my body slide down to the floor. I sat there in the hallway, in the same spot where I used to sit with little Marcus in my lap, reading bedtime stories. And for the first time, I felt real fear of what my own son was capable of doing. 2 days later, I got a certified letter. When I saw the law firm's name on the envelope, my hands started shaking. I opened it real slow, already expecting something bad, but nothing could have prepared me for what I read. Marcos and Keisha were filing a lawsuit to have me declared unable to manage my own assets and requesting immediate transfer of all my property, house, bank accounts, investments, jewelry, everything, into their names. The document said I was showing signs of cognitive decline and making detrimental financial decisions, that I was at risk of being exploited by third parties, and that as my only child and direct relative, Marcus had a legal duty to protect the family estate. Every word was a knife to the gut. I read it 3 or 4 times, trying to believe it was real. My son was suing me, trying to take everything from me. And the reason, that I was incompetent, senile, vulnerable, me, who'd worked as a nurse for 35 years, who'd raised a son alone, who'd managed a household, bills, investments, all of it, without anyone's help, after James died. I sat at the kitchen table with that paper in my hand and tried to think straight. I needed a lawyer. That was obvious. But more than that, I needed to understand how it had gotten to this point, how the baby I'd cradled, the boy I'd protected from everything, had become someone capable of this. I called my friend Ruth from church and told her everything, crying on the phone. She went quiet for a while and then said, "Margaret, you know what this is, right? This is pure greed. That girl put ideas in Marcus's head. And now they want the money before you have a chance to spend it. Donate it. Live your life." I knew Ruth was right, but hearing it out loud made everything even more real, even more painful. "And what do I do, Ruth?" My voice came out weak, broken. "You fight, honey. You show them you're not the confused old lady they're trying to paint you as, and brace yourself, 'cause this is gonna get ugly." Over the next few days, I hired a lawyer, Mrs. Patricia Coleman, a black woman in her mid-50s, perfectly styled gray hair, sharp gray suit, the posture of someone who doesn't mess around. She read through the case Marcus had filed and shook her head in disgust. "Miss Margaret, this right here is elder abuse dressed up as protection. They've got absolutely no grounds to claim incompetence. Do you have any medical diagnosis? Any history of mental confusion, serious memory loss?" I shook my head. "Nothing. I see my doctor regularly. Everything's normal for my age." Patricia smiled, but it was a warrior's smile. "Then we're going on the offensive. And let me tell you something. When this case goes to court, when the bailiff reads out loud all your assets and they realize what's really at stake, you're gonna see their faces change, because there's something they don't know yet. And when they find out, everything's gonna flip." I didn't quite understand what she meant right then, but Patricia had that glint in her eye, that kind of confidence that comes from someone who's seen it all and knows exactly how to play the game. "Trust me, Margaret," she said, squeezing my hand. They messed with the wrong person. I left that office with my heart a little lighter, but also with a tightness in my chest that wouldn't go away. Because no matter what happened in court, no matter if I won or lost, one thing I already knew. My relationship with my son was over. And that pain, no judge in the world could fix that. The hearing was scheduled for a freezing Monday in January 2023. I barely slept the night before. Just lay there in bed, staring at the ceiling, remembering everything. The nights I'd stayed up when Marcus was a baby with colic. The times I'd worked double shifts at the hospital so I could pay for his school uniforms. Graduation day, when he walked across that stage and waved at me in the audience, and I cried tears of pride. How'd we get here? How had that little boy turned into a man capable of dragging me to court, calling me incompetent, trying to take everything I'd built? At 5 a.m, I gave up on sleep, got up, made strong coffee, and sat in the kitchen waiting for the sun to rise. The house was so quiet I could hear the living room clock ticking off every single second. Patricia came to pick me up at 8 sharp. She showed up with that no-nonsense posture, handed me a folder with copies of all the documents, and said, "Take a deep breath, Margaret. Today, you're gonna show them who you really are." On the way to the courthouse, she explained how the hearing would go. The judge would hear arguments from Marcus's lawyer, then ours, and would review the evidence each side presented. They're gonna try to paint you as confused, forgetful, vulnerable. But we've got your medical records, statements from your doctor, bank statements showing you manage your finances perfectly. And there's one more thing. She gave that sideways smile again. But that's a surprise for the right moment. I wanted to ask what it was, but something about the way she said it made me trust her and keep quiet. When we walked into the courthouse building, my stomach turned. Those long hallways, the smell of old paper and polished wood, the sound of shoes echoing on the cold floor. Everything made me nervous. We entered the courtroom, and that's when I saw them. Marcus and Keisha were already sitting on the other side, with a lawyer in a pinstripe suit who looked like he'd walked straight out of a bank commercial. Marcus glanced at me for just a second, just one, and looked away real quick. Didn't greet me. Didn't wave. Nothing. It was like I was a stranger. Keisha, on the other hand, stared right at me with that hard look, almost challenging. She was dressed all business, navy blazer, hair pulled back perfectly, makeup flawless, playing the part of the concerned daughter-in-law. Made me sick. The judge walked in, a white man around 60, gray hair, reading glasses hanging around his neck. Judge Howard Canton, the nameplate on his desk said. He banged the gavel, called for order, and the hearing began. Marcus's lawyer went first. He painted a picture of me as an elderly woman, widowed, alone, unable to make rational decisions about her estate. Said I'd refused family help, that I was stubbornly attached to a house too big for me, that I'd reacted aggressively and irrationally when they'd offered assistance. Every word was a distortion of the truth. He made it sound like Marcus was this devoted son trying to save his mother from herself, and I was the stubborn old woman screwing everything up. I clenched my hands in my lap so hard my nails dug into my palms. Patricia lightly touched my arm, reminding me to stay calm. Then it was her turn. Patricia stood up with the posture of someone who owns the room and started dismantling every single argument. She presented my medical records from the past 2 years, all normal. Presented a letter from Dr. Howard Chen, my doctor for 15 years, certifying that I showed no signs of dementia, cognitive decline, or any condition preventing me from managing my life. Presented my bank statements showing I paid all my bills on time, that I had well-managed investments, that I had no debt. Your Honor, she said, turning to face the judge. Ms. Margaret Thompson is not a vulnerable elderly woman. She's a 64-year-old woman, lucid, independent, who worked for 35 years as a nurse, raised a son alone after being widowed, and manages her estate with absolute competence. What we have here isn't a concerned son. This is an attempt to seize control of assets while the rightful owner is still alive and perfectly capable. Marcus's lawyer stood up to object, but the judge raised his hand for silence. I want to hear from Miss Thompson. He looked directly at me. Ma'am, would you please stand? I stood up, legs shaking a bit, but steady. Mrs. Thompson, do you understand the nature of these proceedings? Yes, sir. My voice came out stronger than I expected. My son is trying to have me declared incompetent so he can take my property. And how do you feel about that? I took a deep breath, looked at Marcus. He still wouldn't meet my eyes. I feel betrayed, Your Honor. I spent my entire life sacrificing for that man right there, worked double shifts to pay for his education, went without buying new clothes for myself so I could get him name-brand sneakers, and now, because I wouldn't hand over my house, because I wouldn't give up my independence, he brings me here and treats me like I'm senile. I'm not. I know exactly what I have, what I've earned, and what I want to do with it. The judge jotted something down and then asked the bailiff to read the complete list of assets in dispute. That's when everything started to shift. The bailiff grabbed a folder, opened it, and started reading out loud. Residential property located at 847 Azalea Street, Somerville, Augusta, Georgia. Appraised at $320,000. Marcus and Keisha exchanged a quick look, like, that's it. It's ours. The bailiff continued. Checking account at Augusta Bank, balance of $42,000. Savings account at the same bank, balance of $38,000. Investment fund holdings, total of $95,000. I saw Keisha moving her lips, adding it up mentally. She was practically glowing. But the bailiff wasn't done. Life insurance policy left by the deceased James Thompson, value of $250,000, beneficiary Margaret Louise Thompson. The room got tenser. Marcus shifted in his chair. Jewelry collection including 1.5-carat diamond engagement ring, white gold wedding band, pearl earrings, men's Rolex watch belonging to the deceased, gold necklace with sapphire pendant, estimated value $40,000. Keisha was leaning forward now, hanging on every word. And then the bailiff turned the page, and I saw his expression change slightly. He looked at the judge, who gestured for him to continue. Commercial property. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. Marcus frowned. Commercial property located at 1520 Broad Street, downtown Augusta. 2-story building currently leased to 3 commercial establishments. Monthly rental income, $8,500. Estimated property value, $750,000. The silence that fell over that courtroom was deafening. I watched Marcus's face drain of all color. Keisha's mouth literally dropped open. Their lawyer blinked several times in a row, trying to process it. Nobody knew about that property. Nobody. Not even Marcus. Patricia had advised me not to tell anyone, and I'd followed her advice. That building had belonged to James, bought decades ago when downtown was still recovering. He never talked much about it, kept everything discreet, managed through a property management company. When he died, it passed to me, and I'd kept quiet, collecting the rent every month, reinvesting, saving. It was my secret, my security. And now, right there in court, it had become my ammunition. The judge took off his glasses, cleaned them slowly, and looked at Marcus's lawyer. Dr. Patterson, were you aware of this commercial property when you prepared this case? The lawyer stammered. No, Your Honor. My client, he informed us about the residence and the bank accounts. But, I see. The judge cut him off and turned to Marcus. Mr. Thompson, you didn't know your mother owned a commercial property valued at $750,000. Marcus opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. No, Your Honor, I had no idea. The judge shook his head slowly. Interesting. You claim your mother is incapable of managing her assets, yet she's been managing a high-value commercial property for years without you even knowing it existed. That tells me one of two things. Mr. Thompson, either your mother is extremely competent and discreet about her business affairs, or you're not as concerned about her well-being as you claim to be. The room went absolutely silent. I looked at Marcus, and for the first time that morning, our eyes met. And what I saw in them wasn't shame. It was anger, pure anger at getting caught, at losing. The judge called for a 15-minute recess. The second he left the room, I saw Marcus and Keisha turn toward each other, whispering furiously. Their lawyer was trying to calm the situation, but you could tell he was nervous too. Patricia leaned toward me and whispered, "You see their faces? That's exactly what I expected. They thought they were going to take down some helpless old lady with a little house and some savings. Now they found out there's over $1 million at stake and that you've been managing everything perfectly fine on your own." I couldn't speak. My heart was racing, pounding so hard I could feel it in my neck, in my temples. I'd imagined so many scenarios in my head, but seeing that naked greed on Keisha's face, seeing my son unable to look me in the eye, it was worse than I'd imagined. When the judge came back, the atmosphere had completely shifted. He sat down, organized some papers, and looked straight at Marcus. "Mr. Thompson, I'm going to ask you a few questions, and I expect honest answers. When was the last time you visited your mother before filing this lawsuit?" Marcus cleared his throat. A few days before, Your Honor." "And during that visit, did your mother show any signs of confusion, forget names, dates, appointments, have trouble understanding conversations?" "Not exactly, but yes or no, Mr. Thompson." The judge's voice was firm. "No." "Has your mother ever been diagnosed with any neurological or psychiatric condition?" "No." "Does she pay her bills on time?" Marcus hesitated. "Yes." "Does she drive?" "Yes." "Does she live independently, cook, clean, take care of herself?" "Yes." "But, Your Honor, the issue isn't just that." The judge raised his hand, cutting him off. "The issue, Mr. Thompson, is exactly that. You filed a petition claiming your mother is incapable of managing her own assets, but so far you haven't presented a single piece of concrete evidence of that. Meanwhile, your mother has presented medical records attesting to full capacity, an impeccable financial history, and proof that she manages a considerable real estate portfolio without any assistance. What I see here isn't filial concern, it's financial interest." His voice got harder. "And that, sir, is something this court does not tolerate." I felt tears starting to burn in my eyes, but I blinked hard. I wasn't going to cry there, not in front of them. Patricia squeezed my hand under the table. Keisha couldn't keep quiet. She suddenly stood up, and the lawyer tried to pull her back down, but she shook off his arm. "Your Honor, with all due respect, the issue here is that Margaret is alone, in a big house with significant assets, and she is vulnerable. She might not be showing signs now, but what about in a few years? What if she becomes a victim of scammers? What if she starts losing capacity and nobody has the authority to protect her assets?" The judge looked at Keisha with an expression I can only describe as deep disapproval. "Mrs. Thompson, You are not a party to these proceedings. But since you've decided to speak, let me clarify something. Concern about what if is not legal grounds for removing the rights of a competent person. If and when Miss Margaret Thompson demonstrates incapacity, which so far there's no evidence whatsoever will happen, there are appropriate legal processes. But taking someone's property preemptively because one day she might become senile, that doesn't exist anywhere in the law. Keisha sat down, face flushed. Marcus ran his hand over his face, and I noticed he was sweating. The judge turned to me again. Miss Thompson, is there anything you'd like to add? I looked at Patricia, who gave me an encouraging nod. I stood up slowly, bracing my hands on the table. Your Honor, I just want to say that I'm not perfect. I forget where I put my keys sometimes. I mix up the day of the month every now and then. But everybody does that, right? That doesn't make me incompetent. I worked my whole life, raised my son alone after being widowed, and I know the value of every penny I have. I know I earned all of this through honest work, through sacrifice. My voice shook a little, but I kept going. And what hurts the most, Your Honor, isn't even the lawsuit. It's realizing that to my son, I'm not a person anymore. I'm an estate, an inheritance he wants to cash in on while I'm still alive. I looked straight at Marcus when I said that. He finally met my eyes, and for a second, just 1 second, I saw something flash across his face. Shame, remorse, I don't know. It passed too quickly. I don't have anything else to say, Your Honor. Just that I want to keep living my life in my house with my independence. And when I die, whatever's left will be his anyway. But as long as I'm alive, as long as I'm lucid, I want the right to decide what to do with what's mine. I sat back down, and Patricia put her arm around my shoulders, a quick gesture of support. The judge stayed silent for a while, looking at the papers in front of him, then at the people in the room, and finally banged the gavel. Decision. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. After reviewing all the evidence presented, the testimonies, and Ms. Margaret Thompson's medical and financial documents, this court determines there is no legal or factual basis for the claim of incompetence. Mr. Marcus Thompson's petition is denied in its entirety. I heard it, but it took a few seconds to process. Denied. I'd won. Furthermore, the judge continued, and his tone got more severe. This court observes that this action had characteristics of bad faith and financial interest, disguised as family concern. It is hereby ordered that Mr. Marcus Thompson and Mrs. Keisha Thompson are responsible for all of Mrs. Margaret Thompson's court costs, including attorney's fees. And let it be noted in this record that any future attempt to question Miss Thompson's capacity without concrete medical evidence will be viewed as judicial harassment. Marcus sank into his chair. Keisha covered her face with her hands. Their lawyer gathered his papers quickly, clearly wanting to get out of there ASAP. The judge banged the gavel one more time. This hearing is adjourned. He stood up and left. Patricia hugged me right there in front of everyone. You did it, Margaret. You did it. I was shaking, my whole body shaking, but not from fear. It was relief, anger, sadness, all mixed together. I looked across the room. Marcus was getting up, avoiding my gaze again. Keisha was already on her feet, purse on her shoulder, pulling him by the arm. They were gonna leave without speaking to me, without even looking at me. But something in me wouldn't let that happen. I stood up and called out, Marcus. He stopped, turned slowly. We stood there, separated by about 10 feet and by a chasm that would never be crossed again. I just wanted you to know, I said, and my voice was calm now, steady, that I would have given you everything, if you'd waited, If you treated me with respect, with love, the way a mother deserves to be treated, but you didn't want to wait, you wanted to take, and now you're not getting anything." I saw him open his mouth, but no sound came out. Keisha pulled him harder. "Let's go, Marcus." And they left, walked out of that courtroom and out of my life. I stood there watching them go, and for the first time in months, I took a deep breath. A real one, like some giant weight had been lifted off my chest. Patricia took me to a cafe near the courthouse. We sat in a corner booth. She ordered 2 strong coffees and a slice of lemon pie for us to split. "How are you feeling?" she asked. I didn't know how to answer. "Empty," I finally said. "Relieved, but empty." "That's normal," she said, stirring sugar into her coffee. "You won the legal battle, Margaret, but you lost your son in the process, and there's no victory that makes up for that." She was right. I had my house, my money, my independence, but my son was gone. And as much as he'd hurt me, as much as he'd betrayed me, he was still my son. The baby I'd held for the first time in the hospital, the little boy I'd taught to ride a bike, the young man I'd hugged on his wedding day. "Could he come back?" I asked, already knowing the answer. Patricia paused, choosing her words carefully. "Honestly, I don't know. It depends on him. Depends on whether he can see what he did, how much he hurt you. But Margaret, you need to protect yourself now. You need to live your life. You deserve that." I nodded, taking a sip of the hot coffee. Outside, the city kept moving. Cars drove by, people walked on the sidewalk, the world kept spinning, and I was going to keep going too, because I didn't have a choice. Because I was 64 years old, healthy, independent, and had a whole life still left to live, even if that life now had a sun-shaped hole in it that might never be filled. Here's the translation with contractions, idioms, transitions, interjections, modifiers, and colloquialisms. The first few months after the trial were the hardest. I'd won in court, but I'd lost my son, and there was no way not to feel the weight of that every single day. The house got even quieter. I'd wake up in the morning and sometimes forget, For a second, I'd think, "I'll call Marcus, see how he's doing." And then reality would hit all over again. He wasn't going to answer. He'd sued me, tried to take everything from me. And even though part of me still wanted to forgive him, another part, the part that had been humiliated in that courtroom, just couldn't forget. Church helped a lot. Ruth and the other sisters from prayer group surrounded me with care, called me every day, invited me to lunch. One Sunday, Pastor Williams got the whole congregation's attention and asked everyone to pray for me, for the family trials I was going through. I cried right there in front of everybody, no shame at all, because it hurts, hurts in a way I can't even explain properly. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was grief. I was grieving for a son who was still alive, but who I'd lost just the same. Patricia would call me every now and then, just to check in on me. During one of those calls, she suggested something I hadn't considered. "Margaret, have you thought about making a detailed will? I'm not saying to disinherit Marcus, that's your choice, but you need to get everything documented, all buttoned up, so that in the future nobody can question your decisions. And maybe you want to consider leaving part of your estate to causes that matter to you. Charity, the church, whatever." The idea stuck with me. I scheduled a meeting with her the following week, and we sat down to do complete planning. I decided to leave the house and half my savings to Marcus, because at the end of the day, he's still my son. But that commercial building, the one generating $8,500 a month, that one I put in a trust for the church, with the condition that the income be used for assistance programs for elderly people in need. James's jewelry, I split half to Marcus and half to a scholarship fund for nursing students. in memory of the years I spent in that profession. When I finished signing everything, I felt this strange peace, like I'd closed a chapter. Almost a year went by without any contact, no calls, no messages, nothing. On Marcus's birthday, I sent a simple text. "Happy birthday, son. I love you, always will." He read it but didn't respond. At Christmas, I mailed a card. It came back addressee moved, not forwarded. They'd relocated. Didn't even give me the new address. That's when I really accepted it. He'd cut me out of his life for good, and I needed to learn to live with that. But life's got these ironies, you know. In March 2024, over a year after the trial, I was at the grocery store shopping when I ran into an old co-worker of Marcus's, Denise, a woman who'd worked with him at the bank. We greeted each other, made small talk, and then she dropped it without even realizing the weight of the information. Heard Marcus and Keisha got divorced. What a situation, right? She left him as soon as she found out he wasn't going to inherit all that money. I froze right there in the middle of the cereal aisle, holding a box of oatmeal. Divorced? My voice came out weak. When? About 3 months ago, I think. It got pretty ugly from what I heard. She went around saying she'd wasted her time with him, that she could have married someone better positioned. Marcus was devastated. Poor guy. He's living in a tiny apartment in Martinez now. Denise kept talking, but I wasn't processing anymore, so that was it. Keisha had used my son as a stepping stone to the fortune she thought he'd inherit, and when she saw it wasn't happening, she bailed. And Marcus had lost his wife, lost his mother, and, from the sounds of it, lost a whole lot more. I don't know what came over me. Maybe it was mother's instinct, that thing that won't die even when you want it to. I called Patricia and asked for Marcus's current address. She hesitated, warned me to be careful, but gave it to me. It was an apartment in a modest complex in Martinez, way different from the fancy condo where he'd lived before. I drove over there on a Saturday afternoon, heart pounding out of rhythm the whole way. When I got to the door of apartment 304, I stood there for about 5 minutes, just staring, trying to build up the courage. Finally, I knocked. Silence. Knocked again. I heard shuffling footsteps inside, and then the door opened. Marcus was there, but it wasn't the Marcus I knew. He'd lost weight, had deep circles under his eyes, stubble on his face, an old t-shirt and sweatpants. He saw me and froze. We stood there looking at each other, and I saw in his eyes everything I needed to see. Shame, regret, pain. "Hi, son," I said, and my voice shook. He opened his mouth, closed it, and then he broke down, literally collapsed right there in the doorway, started crying the way men cry when they've been holding it in way too long. I went in, closed the door, and hugged my son. Because at the end of the day, as much as he'd hurt me, he was still my boy. I've already translated chapter 6 for you. Here it is again. We sat down on the small couch in that apartment, and Marcus cried for a good 20 minutes. I didn't say anything, just held his hand, the way I used to when he was a kid and woke up from a nightmare. When he finally managed to speak, the words came tumbling out, full of regret. "Mom, I ruined everything. I was an idiot, a horrible son. Keisha, she put those ideas in my head, said you were wasting money, that we deserved it, that it was our right, and I believed her. I wanted to believe it because it was easier than admitting I was being greedy. I took a deep breath. Marcus, Keisha didn't hold a gun to your head. You made choices. You signed those papers. You dragged me to court and tried to take everything from me." He shook his head, tears still streaming down. I know, Mom. And I'm gonna carry this for the rest of my life. When Keisha left me, when she said to my face she'd only stayed with me because of the money she thought I'd inherit, I finally saw it. I destroyed my relationship with you because of a woman who never really loved me. I lost everything that mattered chasing after money. I looked around that apartment. It was simple, clean but empty. Not much furniture, some boxes still unpacked in the corner. How are you getting by?" "Working," he said, wiping his face with the back of his hand. "Got demoted at the bank after the divorce, performance issues. But I'm paying my bills, learning to live with less, and, Mom, I deserve this. I deserve every bit of this pain." I stayed quiet for a while, because part of me agreed. He deserved to suffer the consequences. But another part, that mother part, you just can't switch off, only wanted to hug him and tell him everything would be okay. "I don't know if I can completely forgive you," I said, being honest. "You hurt me in a way I never imagined possible. You humiliated me, made me question whether I'd been a good mother, whether I'd failed to teach you values, dignity, respect." Marcus sobbed again. "You were the best mother in the world. This had nothing to do with you. It was about me, about my greed, my weakness." "Yeah," I agreed. "It was. But Marcus, I need you to understand something. If we're going to try to rebuild anything here, it's going to be on my terms, slowly, with boundaries. And you're going to have to prove, with actions not words, that you've really changed." He nodded quickly, desperately. "Anything, Mom. I'll do anything. First, therapy. You need to work through these issues with a professional. Understand why you let someone manipulate you like that." "I already started," he said quietly. "Been seeing a therapist for 2 months now." That surprised me, but in a good way. "Second, I'm not gonna discuss money, inheritance, property, any of that with you anymore. When I die, you'll get whatever I leave in the will. But as long as I'm alive, that subject doesn't exist between us. Clear, crystal clear. And third, we're taking it slow. I'm not just gonna pretend nothing happened. Trust gets rebuilt little by little, and maybe we'll never have what we had before. But if you really want to try, I'm willing to take it one step at a time." Marcus hugged me again, tight, and I felt him shaking. "Thank you, Mom. Thank you for not giving up on me." I didn't tell him that I'd almost given up, that there were nights I wished I'd never had a child at all so I wouldn't have to feel that pain. But deep down, way deep down, something had held me back. Mother's love is like that, I guess. It's stubborn, it's inconvenient, and sometimes, just sometimes, it's stronger than the hurt. We started slow. Lunch once a month, always in public places, short text conversations. He never asked for money, never mentioned anything related to assets or property. He'd ask how I was doing, if I needed anything. And when I said no, he'd accept it without pushback. It took 6 months before I felt comfortable enough to invite him back to my house. When he arrived, he looked at everything with those eyes full of remorse, like every object was a reminder of what he'd tried to take from me. A year and a half after that afternoon at his apartment, Marcus showed up at church with me on a Sunday. Ruth nearly fell out of her chair when she saw us walk in together. After the service, he asked to speak with Pastor Williams, and in front of the entire congregation, he apologized publicly, not just to me, but to the whole community that had witnessed our pain. Said he'd been consumed by greed, that he'd forgotten the values he'd learned in that very church as a child, and that he was trying to be a better man. I cried. Of course I cried. But this time they were different tears. The truth is, we never went back to what we were before, and that's okay. Some things break in a way that can't be glued back together perfectly. There's always the mark, the crack. But we learn to live with it. Marcos met a new woman, a teacher named Linda, simple, genuine, didn't care about money or status. They started dating slowly. And when he introduced me to her, I saw something in Linda's eyes I'd never seen in Keisha's. Real love. That gave me hope. Today, as I'm writing this for you all, I'm 66 years old, still living in my house in Somerville, still going to church every Sunday, still visiting James at the cemetery every week. The commercial building keeps generating income, and I keep managing everything on my own, proving every day that I'm perfectly capable. Marcus comes to visit every 2 weeks, sometimes brings Linda along. We have lunch, talk about light stuff, and little by little, real slowly, we're rebuilding something. It's not what it was, but it's something. And for someone who went through everything I went through, something is already a lot. If I could give you advice, especially to the women my age who might be going through something similar, it's this: don't let anyone, not even your own kids, convince you that you're incompetent just because you're getting older. Aging isn't synonymous with incompetence. We've got a lifetime of experience, wisdom, battles won, and we deserve respect. If someone tries to take that from you, fight back, defend what's yours. Because in the end, it's not just about the money or the property. It's your dignity. It's the right to live your life on your own terms until your last day. I survived my son's betrayal, survived the courtroom, the humiliation, the pain of feeling like I'd failed as a mother, and in the end, I won. Not just in court, Diana, but in life. I'm still here, standing tall, living at my own pace, on my own terms, and that, nobody's ever gonna take that away from me. Here's the translation with contractions, idioms, transitions, interjections, modifiers, and colloquialisms, and that was my story. It was painful reliving all of this, but at the same time it was freeing to be able to share it with you all. I wanted to know, what did you think? Have you ever been through something similar? Know anyone who was betrayed by their own family like this? Drop your thoughts down in the comments. I read every single one, and I love knowing I'm not alone in this journey. If you made it this far, please leave a like to help me reach more people who might relate to this story. And subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next story that's already popping up on your screen right now. I guarantee it'll move you too. Thanks for listening. Thanks for being here. See you in the next one.